Ever wondered if the perfect house could hide a terrifying secret? Asia Ghost Story presents Haunted House Acquisition, a true story that explores the chilling consequences when a seemingly ideal home harbors a malevolent presence. Get ready for a haunting experience you won't soon forget. The story follows the Jung family, a wealthy family who unwittingly find themselves in a haunted house. What horrors await them? Let's find out. A feeling both real and unreal gripped Jung. The harder he struggled, the tighter the unseen force held him. He felt like he was being choked, his hand firmly grasped by something unseen. Hey, someone, let go of my hand, he cried, but there was no answer. The more he struggled, the tighter the grip became. Hope faded. He tried to speak, but his lips remained sealed. Brother, a voice whispered. Jung responded, Mom, is that you? But his question was met with only absolute darkness and the howling wind outside. He tried again to ask, but his words wouldn't come. His lips moved silently. Who's there? Silence. Across from his bed, a shadowy figure stood. He tried to see who it was, but the form blurred and vanished. Jung gasped for air after waking from what he thought was a nightmare. But it felt so real, so incredibly real, that even his mother, Mrs. Tam, couldn't explain it. Someone had clearly called out to him, held his hand, and he tried to speak, but couldn't. He felt everything intensely. He grabbed his phone. 12 a.m. His hand still ached. He looked, noticing a red mark on his wrist. Jung muttered, What the heck? His nightlight was off, though it was on earlier. His bedroom door opened, revealing Mrs. Tam switching on the lights. She came to his bedside. Jung, what kind of way is that to sleep? Yelling and shouting like that. What's wrong? Jung, half asleep, eyes glazed, responded, No, Mom, nothing's wrong. I guess it's just the new house. A bad dream. It's just the new house, dear. You'll get used to it. Go back to sleep. Yes, Mom, I'm fine. Go back to your room. I need to tidy up some things tomorrow. Okay. Go back to sleep. She tucked him in. Jung, 24 years old, was still a child to Mrs. Tam. As she left, Mrs. Tam shivered, a cold wave washing down her spine. Felt like someone was watching her every move. She hurried back to her room and locked the door. She tried to sleep, but couldn't. Mrs. Tam was a successful businesswoman and very meticulous. When buying this house, she consulted a feng shui master, who confirmed it was auspicious for Jung. So she bought it without haggling or hesitation, mainly to ensure Jung could marry soon. Mrs. Tam heard even footsteps approaching her room. She listened, the steps steady. Pretending to be asleep, she still heard the steady, soft steps. She couldn't take it anymore. She called to her husband. Ben. Mr. Ben awoke, but before he could speak, Mrs. Tam hushed him, whispering, Did you hear something? Mr. Ben listened. No, I didn't hear anything. The footsteps were beside Mrs. Tam's ear. Did you hear it now? Mr. Ben, annoyed at being woken up, snapped, You're being superstitious. There's nothing there. Go back to sleep. He turned over, but the footsteps continued. Mrs. Tam, trembling, shook her husband again. Ben, wake up. It sounds loud. Is there a burglar? This time, he jumped up and switched on the lights. Everything seemed normal. He looked at his wife. Look properly. There's nothing here. Go back to sleep. I need to sleep too. I have a lot to do tomorrow. As he turned to switch off the lights, he glanced at the floor and saw dark footprints on the white floor. He stammered, You see that? Look. Mrs. Tam and Mr. Ben stared at each other, mouths agape, trembling uncontrollably. Mrs. Tam, equally terrified, whispered, Maybe it's... No, don't say it. They remained huddled under the covers, silent. Minutes turned into hours. The footsteps stopped, but they didn't dare move. After 6 a.m., Jung woke up hungry. He went to the kitchen, but the door was closed, the kitchen cold. Huh? Why isn't Mom up cooking? He thought maybe the new house had made her sleep so soundly she'd forgotten her routine. He opened his door and called, "Mom, what are we having for breakfast? Did the new house make you sleep through breakfast?" Hearing their son's voice, both parents joyfully threw off their covers. "Son, Jung, you're awake." Jung noticed his parents were sitting up, not asleep as he'd initially thought. "Mom and Dad, why are you acting so strangely? Why didn't you come downstairs?" Mrs. Tam quickly looked at the floor, finding no footprints. She looked at her husband and son. "Okay, get up, Ben. Let's talk downstairs." Mrs. Tam took Jung's hand, pulling him downstairs quickly, as if someone was about to grab him. Mr. Ben followed. Mrs. Tam made breakfast. After eating, she told Jung, "Jung, after breakfast, wait for me. I'm going to the temple. I have plans with some friends to visit a fortune teller, and I need someone to greet them. What's so important that needs doing now? You can arrange it for another time. Let's go get a protection charm at the temple for the family." This was a lie. Mrs. Tam wanted to consult the temple priest about the previous night's events. Neither parent had slept well, fearful of what might happen next. Mr. Ben agreed. "Okay, let's do as Mom says, son." Jung accompanied his mother. The temple was about 7 kilometers away. The road was hilly, and the traffic was chaotic, covering Jung's blue shirt with red dust. "Mom, this place. These ethnic drivers are terrifying." "Shush, focus on driving. I heard this temple is very spiritual. I'll pray for you to find a wife soon, and for us to have a grandchild." "Mom, don't worry. I'll leave the haunting to the ghosts." Mrs. Tam patted her son's shoulder. "You can't say nice things, can you? Mom's just hoping for grandchildren. You don't understand us old folks. You're already late to get married, let alone have kids. Are you waiting until Mom and Dad are in the grave to get married?" Okay, I know, Mom. But Jung hasn't arrived yet. How can I get married? I need time to date and get to know someone. You're too picky. So many business partners of your dad. Their daughters are beautiful and well-behaved, yet you don't like any of them. Even Hong, she's beautiful and well-behaved, and you still don't like her. You're good at talking only, son. At the temple, they met a monk. "Good morning, master." Adida Fat. "Greetings." Mrs. Tam asked Jung to approach the monk, whispering, "Go talk to the monk first, son. I need to ask him something." Jung obeyed and turned. The monk saw Jung's face and his expression turned grim. When Jung turned back, the monk's face was severe. Mrs. Tam noted the monk's change in demeanor upon seeing Jung. When Jung left, she asked, "Master, is there something wrong with my son? Please tell me. How old is your son?" "He'll be 24 in 26 days, master." The monk, after checking Jung's face, said, "It's bad. Your son has a dark mark on his forehead. Something bad is about to happen to him. Master, please help." Mrs. Tam recounted the night's events, describing the chilling feeling of being watched. The monk, alarmed, said, "It's bad. Your house is haunted by a female ghost. I saw a shadowy figure following your son. It's possessing him." Mrs. Tam, trembling, begged, "Master, please save my family. We don't want." "Rest assured, it can't harm you here at the temple. This power is concentrated in your home. Only when it returns will it be fully powerful." "Thank you, master. It's a new house we bought for my son to get married in. We just moved in last night and experienced trouble. We'll wait until morning to tell Jung and have him come here. Before buying it, we checked the feng shui. It's supposedly good for him. I don't understand why this is happening. Can I sell this house, master?" The monk sighed, "Don't worry about selling. If it's attached to your son, it will follow him wherever he goes. Then, master, please help my family. I'm eternally grateful." "Here," he said, handing her charms, "have him wear these. They're a temporary measure. We'll see what happens and go from there. I'm not all powerful, but I will do what I can. If you need me, call me." He gave Mrs. Tam his number. Mrs. Tam, holding the charms, was overwhelmed. She remembered the previous homeowner's discomfort and pale face when they first saw the house. Mrs. Tam and Mr. Ben had asked, "What's wrong? You don't look well." The homeowner had said, "I'm ill, or maybe you just aren't comfortable. Now, there's nothing more I can do." Mrs. Tam found the house clean, and the feng shui favorable for June, so she didn't hesitate. Now she realized her haste. The seller had been too eager to sell, offering a steep discount of almost 1/3. The house clearly had problems. That's why they sold it so quickly. They claimed it was for their grandchild overseas, who wasn't coming back. It was a reckless sale. Mrs. Tam knew she'd been foolish, and the bad luck was hers to bear. The ghost was attached to June, so selling the house was futile. They could only find a powerful exorcist. Why hadn't the feng shui master detected the presence of the ghost? She hoped the monk could help her family. Back home, Mrs. Tam went to the family altar, burning incense and praying for protection and for June, her only grandson. June, though not fond of jewelry, didn't want to upset his mother, so he wore the charms. But he removed them to shower and forgot to put them back on. Who are you?" June mumbled. A beautiful girl, long black hair, wearing a white dress, appeared, her eyes sad. "I am your past life wife. Will you come with me?" June looked at his girlfriend next to him, hesitant to tell her that this was his fiancée. But before he could speak, the girl's eyes turned fierce, her anger palpable. She lunged towards June. Her eyes, like knives, were fixed on his girlfriend, sleeping peacefully. "No, what are you doing? You are my husband. Why are you with this girl?" June saw the girl's eyes blazing with rage. Her hand, pale and sharp, moved towards his girlfriend's neck. "What are you doing? Don't you want to be with me?" June, what's wrong? Wake up. Why is your phone cord around your neck? Be careful." June jolted awake. Relieved it was a dream, he still felt shaken. He acted normal before his mother but was still trembling. He removed the phone cord from his neck. "I had a terrible nightmare, Mom." "What was it about?" "The who? I dreamed something. I need to tell you." Mrs. Tam saw June wasn't wearing the charms. "Hey, where's the charm I gave you yesterday? Why aren't you wearing it?" Hearing this, June remembered removing them for his shower and forgetting to put them back on. He scratched his head, smiling sheepishly. "I took it off to shower, Mom, and I forgot. Put it on quickly." "You forgot. Hurry, then we'll talk." June, still uneasy from the dream, hurried to the bathroom to retrieve the charms. He was relieved they were still there. Otherwise, he'd really have something to explain. He came out and found his mother sitting, looking thoughtful. "Mom, what's wrong? You look worried." Mrs. Tam looked at him sadly. "Since moving here, you haven't slept well. Are you having nightmares? Every night you scream and yell." "I can't sleep either." June rubbed his mother's shoulders. "It's nothing serious, Mom. Just bad dreams." A shiver ran down his spine. But Mrs. Tam, seeing her son's distress, asked anxiously, "But what?" June, seeing his mother's concern, and remembering her morning request to visit the temple, told her everything, the dream, half real, half unreal. Mrs. Tam listened, goosebumps rising all over her body. She reassured June and recounted everything the monk had said, and especially June's not wearing the charm. They looked at each other, fear in their eyes. Mrs. Tam tried to stay calm. "Don't worry, son. You have the charms now. Remember to wear them and don't forget them. If anything else happens, we'll ask the monk for help. Rest for a bit, it's almost dawn." Leaving June's room, Mrs. Tam was worried. She replayed June's dream in her mind. "I am your past life wife. Will you come with me?" And the phone cord around his neck. Oh my God, could it be? She thought it might be a coincidence, an overactive imagination. But why the cord around his neck if his phone wasn't charging? How could it have happened? She was scared. What if, at that moment, the ghost had tried to take June? What if that ghost was trying to take her son? She couldn't stop thinking about it. The more she thought, the more anxious and confused she became. She just prayed for daylight so she could call the monk. She tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Though she slept better with the charm and heard nothing except June's screams, the unease lingered. The anxiety was unlike anything she had ever felt. Any delay could cost her son his life. She lay still, then jumped up and paced the floor. She couldn't rest. She went to Jung's room, peeking to make sure he was still sleeping soundly. Seeing him safe, she finally returned to her room, settling down to wait. Finally, at 6:45 a.m., she called the monk. The phone rang, and she felt a glimmer of hope. But the call went unanswered. Her anxiety flared, burning within her. Mrs. Tam reassured herself. Maybe the monk is still asleep? I'll call again later. She waited a while, then called the monk again. The Central Highlands dawn was already bright and sunny. Everyone was out working in the garden. Mrs. Tam couldn't wait any longer. She dialed the monk's number and her phone rang. Seeing the monk's number on the screen, she was overjoyed, answering immediately. "Hello, Master. I'm so sorry to bother you so early. Don't worry, we're always here to help. Why are you calling?" Mrs. Tam remembered the important matter and recounted everything her son had told her, her voice trembling with fear. The monk said, "Calm down. Your son forgot to wear the charm. For now, it can't do much harm. The charm is blessed. If the spirit is very strong, it might take several days. Tell your son not to stay out late and always keep the charm on him." Mrs. Tam said yes and hung up. As the monk predicted, since Jung wore the charm, he no longer had nightmares or saw the woman. But strange things still happened. Every night at 12 a.m., Jung woke up, even though he had been sleeping soundly. He heard mournful sounds and screams, accompanied by strong winds howling outside, making the already desolate and wild Central Highlands night even more ominous. The cries and screams were fleeting, quickly fading into the hazy darkness. After a few days, things seemed normal. Mr. Ben continued his contracting work. Jung helped his father manage the workers, and Mrs. Tam took care of the household, occasionally socializing with friends. One day, Jung was about to go downstairs when Mrs. Tam called out, "Jung, where are you going?" Jung replied casually, "To work, Mom." Mrs. Tam gently chided him, "You have to stay home today, Jung. I told you already. Did you forget, or are you ignoring me?" "Mom, I'm very busy. I have to go." Jung hurried out. Mrs. Tam shouted, "Stop. If you don't stay home today, don't call me Mom anymore." Jung pleaded, "Mom, please. It's not like that. I'm not ugly, and I'm only 24. Don't argue. Your father isn't young either. Be considerate of your parents." Jung, resigned, sighed, "All right, Mom. Don't worry. I'll bring my girlfriend home to meet you soon." Mrs. Tam's face brightened. "What? You're bringing your girlfriend home? Jung, are you sure you aren't mistaken?" "Mom, what's wrong? I'm handsome. I'm not worse than anyone else. Why are you reacting like this?" Mrs. Tam rubbed her hands nervously. "No, that's not it. You've never brought anyone home before, so I'm just being cautious. Is it really true, or are you lying to avoid arranged marriages?" "Oh, Mom, you're obsessed with finding me a wife already. Not just a wife, but a grandchild too. If it's true, bring her home. I'll cook a nice meal." "Not today, Mom. My girlfriend has a meeting. I'll bring her home next Sunday to meet you." "Okay? She has a meeting? Okay, then Sunday will do." "What does she do, anyway?" "She's an obstetrician, Mom. I have to go to work now." "Okay, go." Mrs. Tam was pleased that Jung was introducing his girlfriend soon, eagerly awaiting the next day. But she wondered, she's still studying? Can they even get married? Nowadays, people study and get married. There's no problem with that. The next morning, Mrs. Tam woke up early to go to market, unsure of Jung's girlfriend's preferences. She wanted her children to feel comfortable when they had guests over, especially since this time it was her future daughter-in-law. She bought lots of delicious food. Jung was happy to see his mother's enthusiasm, but cautioned her about the amount of food. "Mom, buy less. We don't have that many people to eat all of this." "Okay, let me help you carry this." Mrs. Tam handed Jung a large bag of groceries. That evening, Jung brought his girlfriend home. His mother eagerly awaited them. Hearing Jung's car outside, Mrs. Tam, though busy in the kitchen, dropped everything and rushed to the door. It's the same for everyone. The anticipation before a big event. "Mom, this is Lynn, my future wife-to-be. She's very kind." Jung introduced Lynn, adding, "This is my mother. She's very kind." Mrs. Tam looked at Lynn. "Sit down, dear. Make yourself at home." "Wait a minute, I'm almost done cooking." Lynn quickly sat down. "Hello, Auntie. What can I help with?" "You two just chat. I'll be done soon. Relax, don't be shy," Mrs. Tam said, but saw Lynn follow her to the kitchen. "Oh dear, this girl. I told you two to talk upstairs. Why are you following me down here?" "Auntie, is there anything I can help with? I feel awkward just sitting there." "Then help me with these water spinach." Jung loves sautéed water spinach. "How long have you two been together?" 3 years, Auntie." Mrs. Tam was surprised. 3 years? Wow. Lynn explained nervously. "Jung didn't tell anyone in the family. You've been pressuring him to get married. But he always said he hadn't met the right person yet. You even forced him to go on blind dates yesterday. That's why he finally admitted he had a girlfriend and is bringing me home today." Mrs. Tam and Lynn talked very well. Lunch was warm and happy. Mrs. Tam was very happy with her future daughter-in-law and wanted to plan the wedding as soon as possible. However, seeing Jung come home that day without any emotion, he went straight to his room. Mrs. Tam followed him upstairs. "Jung, what's wrong? Something happened at work? Too much pressure?" "Nothing, Mom. Go downstairs. I'm a little tired." Mrs. Tam worried, checked Jung's temperature, but it was normal. Seeing her worried expression, Jung said, "I'm fine, Mom. Don't worry. It's just a personal matter. Tell me, maybe I can help." "Mom can't help. Go downstairs. Let me rest." Jung watched his mother leave, feeling a pang of longing. His mother always hoped he would marry soon and give her grandchildren. Now his girlfriend has broken up with him without reason. What should he do? It wasn't a fleeting feeling. It was a long-term relationship. He asked Lynn for a reason, but she wouldn't say, refusing to see him anymore. Jung felt suffocated. Of all the girls he'd dated, only Lynn had made his heart beat faster. Yet, Jung found it difficult to accept, so he tried to meet and talk to Lynn again. He'd waited for her near the university for several days without seeing her. Today, he decided to go to her dorm. He knocked on her door, but no one answered. Panicked, he called out, "Lynn, I know you're in there. Tell me why. I won't leave until I know." His phone buzzed with a message. It was from Lynn. It read, "If you still love me, please let me go. Otherwise, neither of us will survive. Don't even think of seeing each other again." Jung was confused and tried to knock again, unsuccessfully. He tried to call Lynn, but her phone was off. Frustrated and heartbroken, he went home. On his way home, he texted Lynn, "What's wrong? Your message scared me. Tell me what happened. What am I supposed to do?" He waited for a reply but got none. Never before had he felt so helpless. A breakup without a reason, and that strange message. He wondered if Lynn had really changed her mind or if something else had happened. Jung was distraught and heartbroken. Home again, Jung's mood was no better. Mrs. Tam saw how distraught her son was and felt immense pity, but didn't know why. When she asked, Jung shook his head. Mr. Ben returned early, tired, explaining, "There was an accident at the worksite. A bucket of cement fell from above, almost hitting me." Mrs. Tam asked, "Serious?" "Luckily, it only grazed my shoulder. But it's a weird thing. Everyone was busy. How could the bucket fall? You were just unlucky. Go take a shower and then we eat." That night, the meal was heavy and silent, despite the absence of any arguments. Mrs. Tam tried to lighten the mood but failed. "Jung, bring Lynn home on Sunday." Looking at his mother, Jung choked up, "Mom, Lynn and I broke up." Mr. Ben and Mrs. Tam were shocked. "What? What happened? Lynn is a good girl, beautiful, bright. Why break up? Was it Lynn or you?" Jung sadly replied, "I don't know. Out of the blue, she texted to break up. I called and texted, but couldn't reach her. I went to her dorm, but she wouldn't see me. Only that message. If you still love me, let me go. Otherwise, we won't survive. Don't even try to meet again. Mrs. Tam said, maybe she found someone else? Girls nowadays are so materialistic. June, I don't think so, Mom. We've been together for 3 years. Maybe something happened to her. Look at this message. June tried to show his mother the text message, but he couldn't find it. His face turned pale. Mrs. Tam asked, what's wrong, son? What's going on? Mom, this is so strange. Lynn texted me yesterday, but now I can't find the message. I'm sure I didn't delete it. It's her new number, and I saved the message in case I needed to contact her again. Mom, the three of them stared at each other, silent. A cold feeling permeated the house, making Mrs. Tam shiver. After dinner, there was a knock at the door. Mr. Ben asked Mrs. Tam to see who it was. We've only just moved here. We should be polite to the neighbors. Mrs. Tam went to the door and saw Mr. Hui, the village head. Before she could speak, he said, hello, I'm the village head. I heard you've just moved in, so I came to say hello. Mrs. Tam, slightly embarrassed, invited him in. She spoke to her husband while she made tea. Mr. Ben, upon learning that it was the village head, said, we've just moved here and haven't had the chance to register our temporary residence yet. Please forgive us. It's a new house, so we are very busy, sir. Ong Hui replied, no problem. We all get to know each other eventually. Your house is near mine, so I just wanted to greet you. We can chat sometime, too. Yes, sir. You must have been living here for a while. Actually, we just moved to this area 20 years ago to work in agriculture. Before that, my wife and I were rubber tappers for 7 years. That job wasn't great, the pay was low, but we were some of the first workers, so we persevered. We hoped for better things later. Ong Hui paused. Mrs. Tam was captivated by the story. What happened? She asked. Ong Hui continued, it was all quite wasteful, you know? But at the time, many people got scared away. The spirits would only reveal themselves to certain people. Those tapping rubber in the faraway plots experienced a lot of strange happenings. Only those brave enough, who hadn't seen the ghost, stayed. Back then, people were scared. Unlike now, even stray ghosts could run rampant. Mrs. Tam and Mr. Ben listened intently to Ong Hui's story, but neither mentioned the ghost in their own house. Perhaps they were being discreet, or maybe they just didn't want to discuss their family's ghost problem with a stranger, especially since they were newcomers. They weren't foolish enough to isolate themselves. Meanwhile, at Lynn's dorm room, Lynn grew thinner day by day from sleeplessness, her eyes dark and puffy. Exhaustion drained her energy, leaving her unable to do anything. Every night she dreamed of a woman in white sitting at the foot of her bed, her long arms reaching out, ready to strangle her, warning Lynn to stay away from June, or she wouldn't be spared. Lynn didn't understand why. Ever since moving to June's house, strange things had happened. She tried texting June, but her phone died. She kept having strange nightmares, especially after June had visited her dorm the previous day. She hadn't dared meet him face to face, only texting him. That night, as Lynn prepared for bed, the window slammed shut. The room turned icy cold and the lamp went out. Lynn looked around, sensing a presence. Her heart pounded, but she tried to stay calm. She heard footsteps approaching. She grabbed her phone, hoping for some light, but it wouldn't turn on. She stammered, Is someone there? She waited, but no one answered. The silence was unnerving. A cold breeze touched her neck, making her shudder. She wanted to look behind her to see who was there, but fear paralyzed her. How dare you get pregnant by my husband? How dare you? A voice echoed from afar. Lynn looked around but saw no one, only the pitch-black night still enveloping her room. Who is that? If there's any misunderstanding, please explain it. I don't even know your husband. How could I be pregnant with his child? You've got the wrong person. Come out here and let's talk. As she finished speaking, a pale, shadowy figure appeared before Lynn. Though it was night, moonlight filtering through the gap in the door allowed Lynn to see. Long hair cascaded down, eyes rolled back, pale lips dry and cracked, like they were about to bleed. Lin screamed and fainted. Jung had been so busy dealing with work problems and no longer focused on Lin as much. Even during his free time, his thoughts still lingered on her, with a mix of affection and sorrow. While walking around the construction site, Jung's phone rang. Seeing Lin's number, he quickly answered. But it was Han, a coworker from Lin's workplace, not Lin. Suspecting something had happened to Lin, Jung anxiously asked, "Han, where's Lin? Why are you calling using Lin's phone? Did something happen to her?" Han replied, "She's at the provincial hospital. She's pregnant." Jung was shocked, speechless. Pregnant? But why is she at the hospital? Han said, "I don't know exactly. Yesterday she collapsed in the street, so I brought her to the hospital. I haven't contacted her family yet. I'm worried if they find out she's pregnant, they'll be upset." The doctor said Lin had morning sickness and was dehydrated, causing her to faint. Hearing this, Jung rushed to his car, heading to the hospital. But then he remembered his work responsibilities. He couldn't leave everything unattended. His father, Mr. Ben, was already out inspecting a site at B14. Uncertain what to do, Jung called his father. "Dad, is everything all right? Is there a problem at the work site?" "No, son. Everything's fine. I just finished a new contract and am heading home now." Relieved, Jung said, "Then could you head to the work site?" "I can't leave now, Dad. Mr. Ben suspected something might have happened." "Is there something wrong at your end, son?" "No, Dad. Everything is fine. The project is progressing well. It's just Lin is in the hospital and there's no one with her." Jung reluctantly mentioned Lin's pregnancy. "Lin is pregnant, Dad. But she just broke up with me." "Lin's pregnant? Why is she in the hospital?" "And they broke up?" "I don't think they broke up, Dad. Dad should come here. I have to go to the hospital." Jung hung up. Mr. Ben shook his head. "Young people, so unpredictable. This generation is so different." After talking to his father, Jung sped to the provincial hospital where Lin was. Entering her room, he found her asleep, her lips pale. Jung felt a pang of heartache. He approached, gently stroking her hair and holding her hand. Lin stirred, waking up to Jung's hand holding hers, a wave of relief washing over her. She felt guilt. Their relationship had been so good, and she knew he loved her deeply. Yet she'd hurt him. She sighed, wiping away tears, her mouth dry. Just then, Jung woke up fully. Lin was already awake, rubbing her eyes sleepily. Jung quickly said, "Are you awake? Are you feeling better? Need anything?" Jung, wanting to be there for her, remembered the strange dream about the woman. This made Lin suddenly panic again when near Jung. But now with a child in her womb, she didn't know what to do. She questioned whether to tell Jung everything and about the woman. After a moment, she spoke, "I'm better. You should go home first." Jung held Lin's hand, saying, "Lin, look at me. Tell me, did I do something wrong? Did something happen to you? Why did you decide to break up while we are in love? Don't you know how much I love and worry about you? We have a baby, don't leave like this. Let's solve this together." Lin, hearing Jung's words, mumbled, "Yes, but tell me everything. Let's tackle this together. Don't be like this. I'm worried. I know you. I never thought you'd leave me for another man, so there must be a reason." This time, Lin decided to tell Jung everything, whatever happened. She had to face this with him, stop living in fear. A sense of dread filled Lin's heart. After a moment of hesitation, Lin bravely explained her fears to Jung. As Lin began to tell her story, both of them felt a chill. The hospital room door suddenly slammed shut, making them both jump. Though Jung was overwhelmed by Lin's story, after a brief moment, he regained his composure. He squeezed her hand tighter and said, "It's all right, my love. It was just a dream. Don't overthink it, it'll affect the baby and your health. You need to rest. I'll call your mother. I am embarrassed to see her now. Don't be. I love you and we're having a child. I want that grandchild. Let me call your mother." Mrs. Tam, busy in the garden, heard the phone ring inside and rushed in to see who was calling. Seeing that it was Jung, she happily answered. After hearing Jung's explanation about Lin and her pregnancy, Mrs. Tam was overjoyed. She was going to be a grandmother. However, she was also worried. She thought for a moment, then said to Jung, "Don't tell Lin yet. She's pregnant and stressed. It's not good to think too much. I'll go see her. Let's support her and wait until she leaves the hospital to talk about marriage." Mrs. Tam called the monk immediately. After Mrs. Tam finished explaining the situation about her future daughter-in-law, the monk pondered. The monk knew the female ghost was powerful, and he wanted to assure Mrs. Tam's family. The monk didn't want to cause harm and hoped the ghost would listen to Buddha scriptures, repent, and find liberation and rebirth. After a moment, the monk replied, "I'll arrange a visit to your house. When your future daughter-in-law is discharged, bring her home and call me." The charm might not work anymore. Mrs. Tam was relieved, hoping the monk would visit their home to exorcise the ghost, so her family could finally live in peace. "Thank you, Master. Please let me know what to prepare. Just bring your future daughter-in-law home. She's pregnant with your grandchild. She has been troubled, so bring her home and call me." Mrs. Tam said yes and immediately went to the hospital. The next day, Lin was discharged and returned to Jung's home. Mrs. Tam arranged a house cleansing ceremony to ward off evil and ensure a peaceful wedding. Lin, sensing Mrs. Tam's kindness, felt relieved. As Jung helped Lin leave the hospital, Mrs. Tam called the monk, worried that if Lin returned home before the monk arrived, the ghost might harm the baby. When Lin entered Jung's house, she felt a chill. Her shoulders ached, heavy and stiff. As Jung helped Lin inside, she turned and looked at him. Her eyes were filled with a strange light, and trails of red blood were trickling down her face. Jung exclaimed, What happened?" Before Jung could finish, Lin's hand swiftly clasped around his throat. Jung was caught off guard, unable to react, wondering how she could become so strong. Jung could only stammer. Mrs. Tam, rushing into the house, saw the scene, gasping, Lin, what are you doing? Calm down. That's Jung." Mrs. Tam collapsed. Her legs felt like they'd been struck. She could only silently pray for everyone. But she wanted to live to see this day. She didn't know what else to do. Lin's eyes, like knives, glared at Jung, who was struggling to breathe. You're my husband, yet you let another woman carry your child. You can't escape death." Lin's grip tightened, making Jung feel like he was suffocating. He struggled, but to no avail. Mrs. Tam, panicked and stammering, pleaded, "Please calm down. Jung is innocent. Please, I beg you, spare him and Lin. They are innocent. They don't know anything." A chilling laugh echoed from Lin. It seemed to come from a distant realm. "Spare them? Let them die. I'll gouge out their eyes, break their necks, and then I will leave them in peace." The monk arrived, chanting steadily. Joining him was another person, constantly murmuring incantations. Lin screamed and collapsed. Seeing the monk arrive, Mrs. Tam felt immense relief. She looked at her son, who had just escaped Lin's grasp. Tears streamed down her face, a mix of joy and relief. Seeing Jung pale and breathless, she rushed to him. "Son, it's all right. The monk is here. The monk is here." She looked at the monk and said, "Thank you, Master, for coming." The monk continued chanting, "Thap vong vio thuong tun. Tam gioi viol wan that. Thien and chi dao su. Tu sin chi tu fu." Lin still clutched her head. "What are you chanting? Go away." The monk stopped chanting and said, "Why did you take a life and refuse to repent? Why are you harming others?" Lin smiled, "So you're quite powerful? Taking a life to punish those who commit adultery." The monk shook his head. "Don't be so stubborn. Buddha teaches compassion and forgiveness. Don't force me to use strong methods on you. Leave this poor girl alone. Otherwise, you'll be trapped in the cycle of suffering, doomed to endless reincarnation. This family is innocent. Don't create more suffering for yourself. Listen to me," Show compassion. Let them go, and I'll pray for your liberation. The monk's words seemed to have an effect. Lin's anger subsided. If you believe your words, follow you to hear Buddhist scriptures. Can you help me with this? The monk agreed. If you need help, just ask. I'll do my best. Mrs. Tam stepped forward. Whatever we need, just tell us. We'll fulfill your wishes. Money is no problem. We'll even burn incense for you. I need a cleansing ritual. It's very cold and damp here. Where is the other woman's soul? What is her name? She's Van Tin. She died by the rubber plantation. The monk considered. This seems fated. Helping others is a good deed. The spirits will protect us. The monk believed that it wouldn't be difficult, considering the family's circumstances. Mrs. Tam nodded. I'll cooperate. I'll also find someone to perform the proper rites for that poor girl's soul. After Mrs. Tam finished speaking, Lin fainted again. Everyone could only see a white shadow floating over Lin's body before disappearing. Mrs. Tam was distraught. Poor child. Is she all right? The monk took out a vial from his bag, sprinkled some on Lin's face, and gave the rest to Mrs. Tam. She's all right now. Apply this to her face and limbs. It will be fine. Thank you, Master. My family is eternally grateful. Thank goodness you came in time. Mrs. Tam offered some money, but the monk refused. Watching the monk leave, Mrs. Tam felt greatly relieved. Now, only the other woman's remains needed to be dealt with. Mrs. Tam immediately called her husband and asked him to find someone to handle the remaining matters to ensure peace. A month later, Jung and Lin's wedding was held. The night before the wedding, Jung dreamt of the ghost again, standing by his bedside, smiling before vanishing into the night. From that day forward, Mr. Ben's family's business prospered. What a terrifying journey through haunted house acquisition. Thanks for sticking with us on Asia Ghost Story. We know it wasn't for the faint of heart. Show your support by liking and subscribing, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new upload. We love hearing from you, so share your thoughts and your own ghost stories if you dare in the comments. Thanks for watching.